showing as live streaming on my device.
It's fine.
Okay, lovely. As it's exactly 7:30, we'll make a start. Welcome everybody to Rochford District Council's remote review committee meeting, and welcome to anybody that is watching via live stream. Thank you for all attending this evening. I'll start with the agenda item number 1, which is apologies for absence. We do have apologies from Councillor Mrs Hoy and Councillor Cannell, and there are no other apologies. Item number 2 is substitute members. We welcome Councillor Mr Hoy for Councillor Mrs Hoy and Councillor Stanley for Councillor Cannell. Evening to you both. Non-members attending, Councillor Smith, welcome, and Councillor Williams. Item number 4, which is minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of March 2020. Members should have a copy of these. They were sent quite a while ago, so hopefully everybody's had a good chance to have a look at them. Are members happy for me to sign a copy of these minutes? It will be at a later date, obviously, but it won't be this evening. But are members happy for me to sign?
Agreed.
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 Thank you. That looks like agreement, and there's nobody that's indicating to speak. So I think we can say that that's okay. So those minutes will be signed.
Chairman, just for clarity, I've kept my mouth shut because obviously I wasn't on the review committee at the last meeting, so I can't comment. So I can't say either way. I wouldn't know.
No, that's fair enough.
That's why I
Thank
sat
you,
silent.
Wilkinson. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Item number 5 is to receive declarations of interest, which do include any whipping declarations. If you can indicate if you have any. I'm looking and it doesn't appear that there are any. Okay, thank you. Item number 6, which is the Treasury Management Annual Review 2018 to 19. Actually, I think that should be 2019 to 2020, shouldn't it? Yes. Is that right, Naomi?
Oh, yes, apologies. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've just actually, but that's the first time I've noted it. So that will be changed, members. Thank you. For this item, we do welcome Naomi Lucas and Councillor Smith. Hopefully members have all had a chance to have a look at the report that has been circulated. As members will see, it's a fairly short and concise report. And in the usual way that I try to do things on review, if I can ask Naomi firstly, just to run through the report for members, just highlight any points that you think need to be highlighted, and then answer any questions that may follow from members. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
So this report is one of 3 regular reports that the review committee receives in respect of the council's treasury management activities each year. So the committee recommends the strategy, the treasury management strategy, to council for approval at the start of the year. It then receives a mid-year report, and this is the annual year-end report, which sets out the position, as Councillor Burton said, for the 1920 financial year. So the report is reasonably self-explanatory, hopefully. It sets out the investments that the council has made during the course of the year, including the interest rate that those investments have earned on average, and the cash balances that the council has held for investment. So members will be able to see that the Bank of England base rate was held flat at 0.75% during the financial year at the graph at paragraph 3.3. And you can see from the blue line that the average interest rate the council earned on its investments was averaged just under 1% over the course of the year. So just slightly above that Bank of England base rate. Members will be aware that Rochford District Council has a relatively low risk risk appetite to its treasury management activities. So the interest rate earned is usually fairly low and tracks the base rate. So at at paragraph 4.1, you can see that at year end, the balance of investments held was 13.8 million. And that was spread across £6 million with Santander, £4 million with Lloyds, and 3.8 million in a money market fund. So all of those are investments in line with the treasury management strategy that was approved by this committee at the start of the 1920 financial year. This enabled the council to earn just over £147,000 of interest during the course of the year, which is a bit above the budgeted amount of £80,000, but that was mainly due to the fact that the average balances held by the council increased during the course of the year. So I think that's probably all I would draw out from the reports. As I say, it's relatively straightforward report, hopefully, and yeah, as I say, the annual position is in line with the strategy agreed by this committee at the start of the year. So if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Naomi, for that. Just so that members are aware, I have asked some questions already from Naomi, which she managed to answer some for me as well. Councillor, Mr. Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't know if Councillor Smith wanted to go before me as his portfolio holder, or if he wanted to add something to Naomi's report. That was all.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, it's just a very small amount to add. I think the report reflects what is a successful year as far as our treasury management is concerned, and I'd just point you to three locations within the report. At 2.2, you see that the operational issues connected with the treasury management are delegated to officers, and I do think they have done well in this. On 2.4, there's a statement of the standards that we have to meet, and I do believe that we have met those. And then finally on 4.5, there's reference to our advisors, Link Asset Management. And again, I think I have to reflect that they've served us well again. So I am quite pleased with the report and the year that you're reviewing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Mr. Hoy, thank you for letting Councillor Smith go first.
That's fine. Thank you, Chairman. I believe Naomi's actually answered the question I had anyway. It was really, I just wanted confirmation, and I read the report. I believe the strategy is still the same as it used to be, and I just really wanted confirmation that there's been no changes to the council's investment risk. We're still investing in the same sort of things we were before, and that hasn't changed.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy. Yeah, the strategy we're abiding by for the 1920 financial year has obviously been replaced now by the 2021 Treasury Management Strategy, which was again recommended by the review committee earlier this year to full council for approval. But I think you should already be aware that yeah, the strategy for this financial year did not change materially, if at all, from the previous year's financial strategy, treasury management strategy. So yeah, there's no material changes in our risk appetite in the treasury management strategy for this financial year.
Yes, thank you. That's my understanding as well.
Thank you, Councillor Hoy and Naomi. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very quick question I wanted to ask Naomi, if I may. This is obviously the first time I've seen so in depth the sort of investments the council does, and I don't know how on earth you've managed to achieve such good returns, because I mean, I know what I get off the remainder of my lump sum, and it's nothing like this sort of return. So it's it's fantastic what you've achieved. The £147,110, Naomi, is that net? In other words, is that after we have to pay Link Asset Services for their services? So is that £147,110? Is that what we have left over, or does that their fee have to come out from that?
That's the gross amount of interest earned. The fee we pay is separate to that. So yeah, if you wanted to look at it as a net position, you could subtract the fee that we pay Link Asset Services from that amount, I suppose.
Okay. Do you happen to know what that is?
Yes, I think it's detailed in the report.
Apologies, sorry if it is.
So at paragraph 6.2,
I've seen it.
the
Yep,
contract is £7,750 per year. Yeah. So
Okay.
the net position would be roughly £140,000.
£140,000. Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much. Thanks, Naomi.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Thank you again, Naomi. No other members are indicating that they have a question for Naomi, so I think we'll move on to the recommendation, which is it's proposed that the review committee resolves to recommend the contents of the report to full council. I think we're all probably aware now that we will have to go to each member and ask for the vote in favour of that recommendation or against. And I believe that Sonia, if I hand over to Sonia, Sonia is going to do the roll call.
Thank you. So, Councillor Belton, can you please indicate if you'd like a recorded vote or if you want to vote for or against or abstain?
No recorded vote, vote for.
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
You're muted, Jamie.
Here we go.
Recorded vote no and for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Gooding.
No recorded vote and for the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Hazelwood.
For.
Do you want a recorded vote?
Why not?
And you want to vote for the motion?
Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway.
For a recorded vote and for the report.
Thank you. Councillor Hoy.
No to the recorded vote for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Macpherson.
No to the recorded vote and for the recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Against the recorded vote, for the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Milne.
For the recommendation and no recorded vote.
Yeah. Councillor Mrs Pavlin.
No to the recorded vote and for the motion.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
No for the recorded vote and for the recommendation.
Councillor Shaw.
No recorded vote for the motion.
Councillor Sperring.
No to the recorded vote for the motion.
Councillor Stanley. Councillor Stanley.
For and recorded vote, please.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
No to the recorded vote and for the recommendation, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. Sonia, can you just confirm? I think it's clear that overall the committee are for the recommendation. Was the sufficient number of votes reached for a recorded vote?
No, no recorded vote. There were only 2 votes for that, and the vote for the motion was unanimous.
Okay. Thank you, members. Moving on to item number 7, which is the carbon neutral by 2030. Thank you, Councillor Smith. Sorry, I didn't realise that it's come through a bit delayed. So item number 7, carbon neutral by 2030. And for this item, we welcome Marcus Houghton, who will present the report to members in the same way that Naomi just has. He'll run through the report, highlight any areas that he believes that members should be made aware of, and then any questions can follow afterwards. Is that okay with you, Marcus?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman and members. The report essentially summarises the findings and recommendations of the Carbon Neutral Working Group, which was tasked by full council to look at 3 areas. And these were to consider and understand costs, investigate external funding, to consider how this council can encourage developers to design carbon neutral homes and industrial estates through the planning process, and to recommend a policy for this council to consider originally by April 2020. But of course, since the COVID's come along, these timescales have slipped slightly. Key components of the report, which helped shape and the draft policy and action plan, were the ongoing development of the assets programme and the opportunities that present themselves in the upcoming review of the leisure and waste contracts. These 3 aspects represent the vast majority of the carbon footprint of the council. I would add, though, that although these 3 aspects are subject to their own reviews, so I'm not proposing to discuss any of them in any detail tonight, but I would just say that I think with the waste, leisure contract and the asset review, that they're mindful of the impact they could have upon the carbon footprint, and also the opportunities that are there to reduce that and make a significant contribution to a reduction for the council. If I can draw your attention to paragraph 3.6 and 3.7 within the report, reference is made to the source of emissions, and a key driver is to seek opportunities to minimise Scope 1 direct emissions. That's recognising that sources of electricity are becoming cleaner, and therefore it's not a necessity to develop clean sources on site, rather the ability to procure clean sources of electricity to conserve the council. Therefore, a key thrust of the policy will be to wean ourselves off the use of gas and oil as fuel sources for heating and vehicles, with a presumption that cleaner and cheaper sources of electricity will become available in the near future. There was also discussion regarding the use of tree planting to offset carbon consumption, and the report recognises the role the council can play. However, it should be noted that in terms of achieving carbon neutrality, the government guidance does not recognise this as a tangible method for offsetting carbon use when calculating the authority's emissions. Therefore, although tree planting within an open space will be actively planned for, the contribution that tree planting makes should not be viewed as a licence to continue to pollute. The council must strive to reduce its carbon footprint rather than just offset. Influencing the planning process was also looked into, and it was noted that the best opportunity to shape better carbon neutral outcomes is through the ongoing local plan process. The adoption of a carbon neutral policy will add weight to incorporating appropriate planning policy into the new local plan. Reference was made to the Greater Manchester planning policy, where there is a clear aspirational target set within that policy, and there's a list of ways in which that can be achieved in very clear English, all contained within a single specific policy for carbon reduction within the local plan. So it makes it very clear that there is a set purpose for that policy. The report refers to a draft policy and action plan, with a draft action plan to be seen very much as a living document, which develops as it becomes clear what actions can be achieved as we begin to do further, if you like, research and feasibility studies into different options that become available. One of the main observations of the working group is that the breadth and complexity of the opportunities that are available to reduce the carbon footprint of the organisation and to take forward will require a dedicated resource. Now, whether that's part of the council or in a wider partnership requires to be decided. And on that note, if I can draw your attention to recommendations, particularly recommendation 9, on reflection, having some further conversation with potential partners, it would seem premature to identify a specific resource at this stage. And I'd like to propose that the wording is changed to read, to investigate the potential costs of a carbon reduction officer or other possible arrangements such as partnership working to deliver the initiatives in the proposed action plan. Once quantified, any request for additional resource will be needed to consider as part of the budget setting process for 2021-22. And that's really because I think since we've written the plan, we've had further conversations with partners, and it becomes clear that we possibly have a different approach to perhaps our own officer, which in many ways the recommendation constrains us to at the moment. I'm happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcus. If I could go to Councillor Williams first. Good evening, Councillor Williams.
Good evening, thank you, Chairman. I would just like to thank the working group, members of the working group, and especially the officers for this very detailed report. It's very concise. Thank you very much. I'm sure Marcus will be able to answer any questions required. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just got a couple of questions to Marcus, if I may. The first, well, one's a point actually, then a couple of questions. The council decision that's recorded at 3.60, I really like that, fully in support of that, and it brings the carbon issue into every decision or every policy that the council makes. I think that's really positive. A couple of questions, if I may. Going back slightly earlier in the report, at paragraph 3.51, the final sentence says, however, the council's commitment to reduce its carbon footprint would not outweigh the national policy requirement to meet growth needs of housing and jobs. Is that the author's opinion, or is that the legal basis? In other words, the national policy would always trump whatever we want to do. So we can't move faster towards carbon neutrality than the government wants us to. That's my first question. The second question is in relation to, do you want me to take them one at a time, Jem? Would that be easier?
Actually, I think if we could on this occasion, yeah, just because of the setup.
Sorry.
If you could just take that one, that's fine. I will come back to you, Councillor Wilkinson.
Okay.
So, I mean, there is certainly a degree of opinion, if you like, in any of these things, in terms of its policy and its planning policy. So there's always a certain level of interpretation, but nevertheless, national policy will always take precedence over local policy. So in many ways, what we can shape in terms of our carbon neutrality policies in a local plan will still have to be mindful of the national policy first and foremost. So if it's not in a line and in kilter with national policy, then when the local plan is tested by an inspector, it will not be found to be sound. So at that point, so yes, national policy does tend to trump local policy.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Just coming back on that before I move on to my second question then, because, and I will stand corrected on this, but my understanding is that that we are trying to achieve carbon neutrality 20 years earlier than the government is, which would indicate that we're moving at a different pace. So if we are going to be moving faster than them, is their policy going to hold us up? Because I thought national policy was that we're going to achieve, they want to be carbon neutral by 2050. So their policy is moving at a slower rate than ours would be. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, but there is an aspiration, I think, for I think they see local of government and certainly government to achieve that target before that time. So okay. The 2030 is more about our own in-house, if you like, keeping our in-house in order.
Okay, thank you. And Chairman, if I may, the second question is in relation to paragraph 3.52. Final sentence says, any assessment of the impact of the road network on air quality would include assessment at peak times and would be carried out by an independent consultant. We're all acutely aware through our experience with the Development Committee, how Essex Highways assess or otherwise the impact on our local air and the road network. So what if the results of the survey referred to in that final paragraph differ from an Essex County Council Highways opinion? Which one would win? I've waited for these to save these questions up for you.
That's a question probably a little outside the breadth of this report. That's all. I'm slightly concerned, in terms of that. I don't think it'll affect the outcome of this, the policy of these reports. I mean, it's more of a question perhaps to speak at the local plan review rather than now, if I may.
Okay, no, fair enough. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That's all I have.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Thank you, Marcus. Councillor Mr. Hoy.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the working group. They did a very thorough job here. And I think they pulled out some very good points and raised the correct issues in many ways. I just do have some concerns that there is a sort of commitment in paragraph 7.21 on Appendix E, but there's no clear commitment in the recommendations for carbon neutrality by 2030. For Councillor Wilkinson and for others, 2030 is the United Nations aim. Others think 2025, and many national governments are going for 2050. You're right, or 2040. But 2030 is seen to be the key. Otherwise, the climate will be out of control. There is no commitment for the new buildings for the council to be carbon neutral. I understand there is potentially an issue around the fact that the preferred bidder has gone out. However, I did understand from talking to a number of officers that can be changed. There is no problem about changing the design on the basis of changes that may have occurred since the tender was put out, for instance. Second concern is there's not any clear political oversight. I assume it would come under Councillor Williams as the portfolio holder for the environment, but it doesn't actually categorically say that. Some councillors deem it important enough that it comes under the leader or the deputy leader as a specific item. Whoever it comes under, it must come under a portfolio holder or the leader or the deputy leader, I believe, and the wording of their responsibilities must include the commitment to be carbon neutral by 2030 as well, and that's missing in the report, so that's a little bit disappointing. So I'd like clarity on who does have responsibility for this on the political level. On item 7, I don't know if we're all getting a little bit what's happening really, but I think item 7, isn't there a motion on the 14th of July around this as well? Was that done via the working group? Did that come out from the working group to decide to do the motion on the 14th of July? That's just one other query, because I think Councillor McPherson was involved. I can't remember who the other one was. My notes weren't big enough for that.
Okay, can we let Marcus just come back?
I've only got about another 3 questions.
Thank you, Councillor Hoyt. Marcus, do you want to just come back on that?
So, so when you refer to item 7, what are you referring to?
Is that the recommendation 7? I think.
Ah, I see. Sorry, I wasn't. I think right, that makes up. I'm going to panic forward. Well, it is item 7 of the report. Sorry, I'm just scanning down. You have to apologise. I started to jump around to look at. Let me have a look at the recommendation 7.
That the revised local plan takes into account the government's environment bill.
Yes, I mean it's correct. Yes, I believe there has been a notice of motion that's been raised on that matter as well. But I mean, that's a separate issue to tonight, I guess. It's not something under my control. The report at this stage, it is very much Councillor Williams, the portfolio holder, who's responsible for taking this forward. I think you're correct. Perhaps there's something that probably needs to be made clearer in the actual sort of policy document, that it is sort of supported by the portfolio holder. I mean, clearly, Councillor Williams has been involved throughout the process, and I've obviously had to report to Councillor Williams on the matter. So it is very much for him to oversee and be, if you like, politically responsible for. But I do take your point. That's pretty sure made a little bit clearer. I'm sorry, there was another question there as well, wasn't there, I believe? Was it an observation? I wasn't quite sure if the other one was a question.
Yeah, I might have made it as an observation, but it probably was a question that why is there no commitment to achieve carbon neutrality? I understand there could be difficulties in achieving it, but I always believe that if there are no targets, it's very hard to move forward sometimes.
I think at this stage, if we're being very honest about this, you know, the officer involved and myself, neither of us are, I guess, professed experts on this matter. So we're reluctant to start setting targets that potentially, you know, with no real knowledge that we can achieve. So I think, again, this is a policy that, like you say, may well need revisiting within a year's time with some more set and more certainty. But I think at this stage, to sort of actually say, we can definitely do this, this and this with, I guess, a certain limited knowledge of the subject would I think I'd be very cautious of doing that as well, if that makes sense.
Okay, that possibly answers the next question, which was that some of the aims are quite woolly, in my opinion. You're aiming where possible to minimise rather than to set targets. I'm an accountant. I like targets. I suppose that's my brain.
Councillor Mr. Hoy, can I just interrupt just for one moment? Councillor McPherson has indicated to speak. I just wanted to check that wasn't in direct response to Councillor Hoy. Councillor McPherson, could you just...
Thank you, Chairman. Well, yes, I can answer. I would like to speak as well at the end, if that's possible, please. But in response to Councillor Mr. Hoy mentioning the motion that's been put forward for full council, he is correct. It does include around the local plan, but it also includes another area around lobbying the Secretary of State to ensure that the National Planning Policy Framework adopts the aims of the Environment Bill, which will obviously help us and impact on future developments. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Mr. Hoy, did you want to...
That's fine. There's only just, I've mentioned about targets. There was a few questions around the officer, but you've said that's being changed anyway. The only other thing is other councils, and I've actually Suffolk released their one today. I know they're a county council, but they've released the aims around publishing an annual carbon budget against target, and I think that would have been a useful idea as well. I mean, I'm not going to vote against this, obviously. It's something I support, and however, I think there are problems that I'm sure that can be overcome and developed over the short term. There's just some things which may have been missed. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Mr. Hoy. Councillor Spearing.
Thank you, Chairman. Marcus has just touched on one of these concerns that I have, and don't get me wrong, I'm not being negative about the need to try and get carbon neutral, and I've been involved in certainly with the contract regarding waste, the implications that we may face there. But there is so much in this these recommendations, and I have great concerns that we will have the resources available to actually control all this. With due respect, Marcus, I know what all the other implications that are being put on you at the moment, and there comes a point where you cannot cover, well, that's my view, you cannot cover all the things that are now being asked of you. I think a resource and a 1 year employee at 50,000, whatever, as far as I can see, if we want to implement all these or get down the road, somebody has got to monitor this. This has got to be a specific job for someone, and it's got to be justified, budgeted, and all the rest of it. Otherwise, there's just so much that it will just, I'm afraid, get lost in the ether, along with all the other aspects that we've got to address once we get out of this COVID situation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spearing. Marcus, did you want to come back on that point?
Yes. I mean, certainly there requires to be a specific resource. I think I was just concerned that I'd almost box myself in a little with such a specific request at this stage. And like you say, I think there's and certainly I think the working group notes as well that there's some fantastic partnership opportunities out there. It doesn't mean they'll come for free. I think there may still well be a resource cost involved. It's just the nature of asking for that resource. I think I'd like a little bit more time before I actually come back and say, this is what we require. I think perhaps we were a little bit, I guess at the time, we perhaps bolted a little bit too early on that one at the time when we asked for the resource. But yes, I'll take your point, we will require some.
And I think that's been reflected in the amendment to
correct, yes.
recommendation 9, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of sort of obvious things that haven't, well, I haven't read all of it. I must admit, I've just scanned through it as I was got involved in this over the last 3 hours. So forgive me for misplacing something. Anyway, Marcus, this is, although this is put together quite well done, there is nothing in there that's where we're going with this carbon neutrality. When we say what materials we're going to go with apart from the housing, which you're speaking about as electric, and not using oil or gas and that sort of thing, which I find that very difficult, but still. Are we, as Boris wants to have more houses built, we are going to use more cement and such like to build these houses, which is quite a large amount of Hello?
Oh.
Hello?
Hello, Councillor Stanley. Yep, we can still hear you, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so with as I said, with the idea of building more homes, the carbon neutrality is going to be very hard to achieve. Even if we go on to electric vehicles and such like, the carbon neutrality is going to be really, really hard to achieve. I think in this particular area where we've got such a lot of housing going on, where do you see our if you like, savings of carbon, of not using carbon as much as where do you? There's no report on there to show where you see it. We're not doing air quality controls any longer. We've stopped doing those. So who is doing the air quality? Is it Essex that's doing it? I don't know. That's just
okay,
a start.
Councillor Stanley. Okay, yeah, if we can just take it there and let Marcus come back on that. I think there are some elements of the report that that do cover some of the questions and issues that you raised. I don't know, would you agree with that, Marcus? I think some of them are covered in there.
It's a very wide-ranging subject, this. So some of it's covered in there. Yes, I mean, in many ways, like you say, again, particularly with the housing, we will be guided very much by national policy. So our policy, a council policy, is about the council achieving neutrality, carbon neutrality by 2030. I think as a district, that's a wider ask than beyond the existing council policy we're putting forward. And that will be something perhaps the local plan can look at, but it'll be governed by, if you like, national planning policy rather than how the council sets out its own house, if that makes sense. They're two different things, two different sides of a coin, I guess, in many ways.
Okay. Can I come back, Chairman, please?
You may, yes.
Thank you. In what you say is okay, I agree with you there. So where do you find our carbon neutrality will be in the council? Do you see it as localised, as what you're trying to? I think what you're trying to say, it will be only what the council do in effect of electric vehicles, charging points, as more and more charging points. Where do you see that?
Yes, I mean, sorry.
Sorry, Mark. I was just going to say, I think that is included in the report, Councillor Stanley. Certainly, parts of it are included in there, but because the topic is so wide, I think it probably will be something that develops over time. Would you agree with that, Marcus?
Yes, I think the thinking was to get the council's own house in order. I think before we start telling others how to get theirs in order. I think was the kind of logic behind it. So if we can demonstrate we can achieve carbon neutrality within our own footprints, then we can start to say to other organisations and housing the site, look, it can be done. I think that was the logic behind it. So the policy is very much about looking at what the council generates, as in exactly that, its own estate and its own vehicles at this stage.
Thank you, Marcus. Does that answer your question, Councillor Stanley? Yep. Okay, lovely. Thank you. The next councillor that I've got indicated to speak was Councillor McPherson. Do you want to speak now, Councillor McPherson, or do you want to wait until the end?
Until the end, if that's okay. Thank you, Chairman. Thanks.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. So moving on, Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't know that we could request an order of speaking as such, and so I would like a right to come back at the end as well. Thank you. I agree with the concerns that have been raised by Councillor Spearing and Stanley. Before I actually speak to the subject, the officer mentioned an amendment. I've not received an amendment. I've just double-checked my papers. What amendment is he referring to, please, in the recommendation? I have got here 9 recommendations. As far as I'm aware, they haven't been altered. Could I have some clarity on that?
You can, Councillor Mrs. Mason. I know that the amendment was submitted very, very late, so apologies if that hasn't got round to everyone. Marcus, is this something you want to address, or would it be better for Sonia?
It's not on the council website either, Mr. Chairman. I think it's, if we have an amendment, we should have time to read that and absorb it. It shouldn't be done in a meeting. I think that's unacceptable. It is.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mrs. Mason. Sonia or Michelle, would one of you be able to come back to that?
If you give me a few moments while you sort of deal with other speakers, I can see if I can actually project it on screen for if I can actually, you know, if I can type the words up and show it on screen for people to have a look at and assimilate, so that you are, because it is just a slight amendment to one of the recommendations in essence.
Okay. Thank you, Sonia.
I'd like to come back when we have that information, because it's rather hard to speak to a recommendation when you don't know what that recommendation is.
Okay, Councillor Mrs. Mason, that's noted.
At a later stage, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Belton.
Thank you. It was just a couple of points. Whilst we were on the working group, we discussed the potential of continued meetings following this recommendation, this paper, just to monitor performance, really, see, because it is a bit of a moving beast, there will be changes. So it was to see if that's something we think will be possible, because it is such a broad topic and things will continue to develop as we progress. And then just a couple of other things. Regarding the amendment that you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, Marcus, I would say, I mean, I agree with I agree with the amendment you're making, in that it possibly is too early to commit to somebody essentially full-time or otherwise. Whilst in my experience, people with sustainability or carbon reduction officers on the council do have better successes. Because we're a small district, it may be worth, as we've looked at during the working group, shared partnerships, leaning on other resources to get the absolute most for our money, our time. And finally, just to remember that this paper, and I think you did just touch on it, it's about RDC as an organisation and not RDC as the district. And I think we're straying into sort of both grounds during some of the comments on this. And actually, a lot of the recommendation, I feel, do quite clearly mark out what the plan is in terms of reducing plastic, in regarding the BREEAM status of the assets and so on. So I think it's about remembering this is about the organisation and not the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. To clarify, in addition to the minor amendment to recommendation 9, which Marcus has touched upon, and that Sonia's previously trying to get up on screen for everybody, in addition to that, there is actually a 10th recommendation that is proposed, and again, that has been rather late. It's a proposal a recommendation that I discussed with Marcus, and that was that the review committee does receive an annual update on the carbon neutral by 2030, so that it does become an annual topic that the review committee comes before review committee. So that was a 10th recommendation that is proposed. It's very short, and hopefully that members will understand the importance of that. Councillor Milne.
Yeah, my question is really around about recommendation number 8. It talks about the opportunities of working in partnership, presumably with the Association of South Essex Councils. I mean, firstly, have we heard anything specific from them at all at the moment? Or is there anything leading in that is coming that way? Because it's in light of the fact that they are put a press release out, or a couple of the councils, about a large prefabricated building plant being put in Basildon area, which presumably is going to be the type of houses in the BRE Innovation Park, which may be zero bills houses, the ones with the solar roofs and the lithium battery storage and all that, but we don't know that. But they're talking about this outfit turning out 1,000 houses a year out of this plant. But we don't see anything at all in any of the releases from the association about any of this. And it may reflect on an approach towards buildings that have carbon neutrality. And the last point is, at BRE, they not only have carbon neutral buildings, because we took Sean Scrutton down there 2 or 3 years ago, they also have clinics and public buildings examples that are zero bills. So have we looked at any of this yet? Are we going to, perhaps in the next year as we go into 2021? That's just what I'm going to ask.
Thank you, Councillor Milne. Marcus, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the short answer is yes, it's something we're going to start looking at, and we haven't precluded any partnerships at this stage.
Okay,
thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
That's something really we could look at and review next year. We'd like to see some movement and some look and research into that. Thank you.
Very possibly. Okay, members, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing that I am on screen. I have a Word document in front of me. Can other members see that?
Yes, Chairman.
Yep. I'll read it out just for clarity. To investigate the potential costs of a carbon reduction officer or other possible arrangements, such as partnership working, to deliver the initiatives in the proposed action plan. Once quantified, any request for additional resource will need to be considered as part of the budget setting process for 2021-2022. And that is the proposed amendment to recommendation number 9, which obviously Marcus has touched on why that amendment has been suggested. I do appreciate, Councillor Mrs Mason, that it is obviously quite late in the day that that's come forward, but hopefully that on screen will give members a chance to read and understand what the recommendation has been amended to. And obviously, if there's any questions about that, then I'm sure we can address those this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I appreciate that. And as you say, it's not, well, I won't say it's not substantial, it's a change. But I do think that if we had come to vote without that amendment, we would have been voting on something in front of us, which was not the motion that is there. And perhaps you could also give us the recommendation number 10, so that we're all very clear what the recommendations are. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. Sonia, if you could possibly display the... Oh, okay. and that is the wording, members, for recommendation number 10, that the review committee receives an annual update on carbon neutral by 2030. I think that touches on Councillor Belton's point that the review committee does need to keep on top of that. Okay, thank you, members. Sonia, are you able to minimise that and get the screen back as it was? Lovely, thank you very much. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chairman. And may I say what a very good recommendation number 10 that was.
And actually, Councillor McPherson, sorry, I just wanted to say thank you. I know that you were chairman of the working group. It's clear to everybody that the working group have done a very thorough job on a very wide-ranging topic. So many thanks for doing that.
Thank you. And I actually just wanted to, first of all, thank my fellow members who all contributed, and especially the officers who worked really hard on this, inviting in other councils that we could talk to as well. The working group was, of course, open to all parties, and yet not all parties joined. But as Councillor Belton has just indicated, our meetings will continue. The carbon neutral working group will continue to run. And I've heard some really good ideas tonight coming from other groups. So please, can they accept this as an invitation again to join and contribute to the working group? In regard to Councillor Sparing's comment around resources, all I will say is we have to find the resources. This is climate change and it cannot be ignored. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Mrs Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I must admit I am slightly concerned, along with Councillor Sparing and Stanley, about the ambivalence of the recommendations and the vagueness of them. However, I do applaud the actual ambitious plans of the working group. And can I ask what the problem we have now is this working group was set up under the review committee. The chairman of that working group has indicated that she wishes that to continue. However, whilst it's up to the review committee to set policy and recommend policy, once those policies are determined, it is conventional for those to be referred back to the portfolio holders to set up their own working groups rather than review. Because if review sets up the working groups, how can we overview and scrutinise, which is our major role, those working groups? So I have a concern with that going forward. I've got nothing but admiration for the ambition that is shown in this report, but I am concerned about the lack of clarity on some of the issues, but I'm more concerned about the fact that if the working group is going to remain under the review committee, no one then will be able to scrutinise that work, and that is a concern. That is our major role. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. I guess the setup could be looked at. I think it was always planned that the working group would remain, certainly for the time being, until I think possibly that they were a bit further along. Is that the correct, Marcus? I know that Paul, that's kind of the discussion that I've had with Paul in the past.
That's my understanding. I take Councillor Mrs Mason's point that, like you say, whether there's the level of independence there. I mean, perhaps it's something to sort of take away and speak to Councillor Williams about as well, about perhaps what's the best way, and speak to Paul about what's the best way of setting it up. It could be that it's the working group's reports back into the review committee once a year, but is actually independent of the review committee in between time.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Councillor Mrs Mason, did you want to come back on that? I can see you've indicated to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Marcus. I appreciate the difficulty, but I'm sure you can appreciate the potential problems that this could create. I wouldn't like to the work that the working group has done to go to not be followed up, but I don't see any reason why the portfolio holders can't constitute the same working group under their umbrellas, and that can be done. So certainly it should be looked at, because otherwise we do run a risk, because these schemes are likely to involve a significant amount of finance, and in some cases risk, and we need to make sure that there is a mechanism to overview and scrutinise any decisions. So I'm glad that you're taking that away, and hopefully we can report back on that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. I think you raised a very good point. Councillor Williams, I can see you've indicated to speak. I'm assuming that's in response to that, is that?
Sorry.
You're on. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I shall make sure that this is taken up by the executive in collaboration with the AD, Marcus. But thank you once again.
Thank you, and I'm assuming that's okay with Councillor McPherson. Obviously, I know that you, as chair of the working group, you've obviously had a lot of input into this, but I think that you're okay with that, are you?
Makes perfect sense. Thank you, Chairman.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Councillor Stanley.
Thank you, Chairman. I just heard Councillor McPherson saying that this is to do with climate change. That's not the only. Is the working group working for a sole entity as carbon neutrality, or are they working together with climate change in other aspects? Thank you.
Councillor McPherson, did you want to come back with regards to that, or?
I'm not quite sure what Councillor Stanley is asking. If he's asking if we're working in partnership with other organisations, if they're of the benefit to Rochford District, yes, we will be. I hope that answers that.
I think that's perfectly acceptable. Thank you, Councillor McPherson. Nobody else is indicating to speak or ask any questions. Now, obviously, members have seen the original 9 recommendations. Are members happy to take all of the recommendations, including the amended number 9 and 10, in one vote? Or it looks like the general consensus is that members are?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, Chair.
One vote, Chair.
Okay. That seems like the majority of members seem quite happy with that. Just to reiterate, it's just in case, because it's not in front of members at the moment, just to clarify the amendment to recommendation number 9, which would read, to investigate the potential costs of a carbon reduction officer or other possible arrangements, such as partnership working, to deliver the initiatives in the proposed action plan. Once quantified, any request for additional resource will need to be considered as part of the budget setting process for 2021-22, and the addition of recommendation 10, that the review committee receives an annual update on carbon neutral by 2030. So, as there are no other indications to speak, Sonia, would I be able to hand over to you at this point just to take a vote from members?
Certainly. So, Councillor Mrs Belton, can you indicate whether or not you want a recorded vote, and if you want to vote for, against, or abstain?
No recorded vote for the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
No recorded vote for the recommendation.
Councillor Mrs Gooding.
No recorded vote and for the recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Hazelwood.
No recorded vote for the recommendation.
Councillor Hookway.
For recorded vote and abstain.
Councillor Hoy.
No to the recorded vote and abstain.
Councillor Mrs McPherson.
No for the recorded vote and for the recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Mason.
I think on balance against the recorded vote, and unfortunately I need to abstain because of the lack of clarity on some of the issues. Thank you.
Councillor Milne.
No recorded vote and for the recommendations.
Councillor Mrs Pavlin.
No for the recorded vote and for the recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Mrs Shaw.
No for a recorded vote, for the recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Shaw.
No for the recorded vote and for the recommendations.
Councillor Sperring.
No to the recorded vote, for the recommendations.
Councillor Stanley.
No for recorded vote and abstain on the recommendations.
Councillor Wilkinson.
No to recorded vote and for the recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much, members, and thank you, Sonia. I think that the majority is for the recommendations taken together from numbers 1 to 10, and I believe there wasn't enough members that indicated for a recorded vote, so that vote won't be recorded, members. Thank you very much, though.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 8, which is the key decision document. Hopefully everyone's got a copy to hand. There are 2 items on the key decision document. The first is referenced 2/20. That's the Modern Slavery Act 2015. My understanding is that this was sent or issued on the 1st of July. Is that right, Sonia? If I just...
The key report was issued on the 1st of July.
Sorry,
and
yeah.
the decision will be issued on the 9th.
9th of July.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the second, which is referenced 3/20, which is the voluntary sector grant allocations decision. I don't believe this has actually been issued yet at all, has it? I think we've got an indication that it's next week.
It will be towards the end of the month that will be the key report will be published.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. Would any members have any questions regarding the key decisions document at all? Okay, thank you. And item number 9, excuse me, which is the work plan. Members will see that there are a couple of months which don't have any items allocated to them as yet. The proposal is that for the September meeting, we move the waste and recycling item. Bless you, Marcus. To the September meeting, and the peer review meeting, the peer review item, which was a recommendation to take forward to this year, which I think was an item that most members wanted to see the review committee look at in detail. That proposal, and these are only proposals, was to put that in for the November meeting. And at the moment, some existing members of the review committee may recall that in 2017, 2018, we actually directly went to the public and asked the public whether or not they would like to nominate any issues, items, or topics to review committee, and we did get one back actually, and we that went into our January meeting. So my proposal is that we do that again this year, because I did quite like the idea of that, and hopefully it does help us engage with the public a bit more. Councillor Mrs Mason, I can see you've indicated to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yep, I can hear you. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, it sounded, I wasn't sure what you said. I agree with you that one overdue aspect for the review committee to undertake is a full examination of the aspects raised and the recommendations provided by the corporate peer review last November. While strengths were observed, so were concerns in leadership, financial planning and viability, organisational leadership and governance, as well as the observation that Rochford District Council needs to be clear what it wants from its partnerships, including a seller. Most concerning was the fact that the overview and scrutiny was not considered effective. Yet overview and scrutiny of the council's decisions and functions is a fundamentally important role, and we need to resolve this. Whilst some of the recommendations have begun to be addressed, there seems to be no clear plan for this. There should be. I do not believe that this should wait until November. It is too important. As the report covers all aspects of the council, perhaps we should look at one area at a time as a way forward and obtain a report from the appropriate portfolio holder on how they are addressing the concerns raised. But that detail is obviously a matter for the committee. We should also be asking the leadership team for their list of what they see as priorities. But I think that this item is so important that it should not be left a whole year before we look at it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mrs.
Would like
Mason.
to come back on other subjects, but perhaps I can leave you to consider bringing that subject forward first.
Certainly, thank you. I have discussed it with Sonia at the moment about the best and most appropriate place to put it in the work plan. The reason we suggested November is purely to deal at the moment with the current working conditions and certain personnel at Rochford District Council and getting input from them and the difficulty that we may have in getting their input at this moment in time. That's really the reason why we suggested November for that. Obviously, we can look at that in a bit more detail if we need to. I don't know if at this stage, Sonia, you wanted to make any comment on that at all, or come back at the end, or?
Yeah, I've got nothing much to add at the moment. It's just having the resource and the expertise at the moment in terms of driving that forward appropriately. I mean, we could try and sort of get it in sort of slightly sooner than that, but I think at the moment there would be a danger of us struggling to give it the proper consideration that it needs.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I can come back, that officer comment explains the problems that the overview and scrutiny has, in that we are not able to be effective in the time span that we should. It is a decision for the whole committee whether this is brought forward or not, but I must admit, I think a report that in November to start working on it a year after the report was first compiled is of concern. But I leave that to you and your expertise.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Mason. I do think it's worth noting that obviously the results of the peer review weren't available until I think the beginning of this year, 2020, or certainly the last month of 2019. And obviously the review committee by then had already set out its work plan, so it was very difficult to shoehorn that item in, essentially. I totally agree with you. I do think it's important that the review committee do look at this. And I think really just obviously in consultation with Sonia, I just feel that perhaps if it's brought forward too soon, we may not do it justice, purely because we just, unfortunately, you do touch on a very good point, but the resources just aren't there at this moment in time. Councillor Wilkinson, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just looking at the additional work that we need to look at, I noticed emergency planning is on there. Now, we're obviously still within the grips of the the pandemic, albeit not quite in the lockdown stage we once were. I wonder, that's obviously a really important and an equally important, I would say, aspect of our review that we need to do. You know, the emergency response, or the response, I should say, and the preparation that we had leading up to this lockdown was woefully inadequate, and I think everybody would probably agree with that. So I just wonder what the thoughts are with regards to when that might feature, because we've got to have a serious review of emergency planning for this council in case we end up in the same situation again in 12 months' time. And I wonder what review is going on in the background that we're not doing, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. I think on the work plan, where it says emergency planning, in the past, this has come before review committee. But obviously, the planning previously has never really touched on the subject of a pandemic. Again, having discussed this with Sonia today, actually, the late Councillor Terry Cutmore, actually in the March meeting, did ask specifically for the topic of COVID-19 coronavirus and how the council responded to that and planning for a similar a pandemic happening in the future. He did ask for that to be on. So I think we possibly need to, I totally agree with you. I think we do need to look at this topic some more, but I think perhaps separately under the heading of the subject of COVID-19 rather than emergency planning, which in the past has taken an awful lot more into consideration. But I do agree with you, and it's something I've discussed with Sonia, who I know in turn has discussed with Angela, I think. And I think the general consensus is that it does need to be reviewed by review committee. But I think I would rather see it being reviewed specifically under the topic or the heading of COVID-19 and the council's response and planning for, rather than emergency planning, if that makes sense.
It does. Forgive me, I didn't realise, obviously this is my first meeting, I didn't realise there was a separate,
no, that's fine.
A separate look at the COVID-19. So that's where I was coming from. So that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. I did think that might be raised as a query. Councillor Mr. Hoy.
Thank you, Chairman. Two questions. The first one relates to the one Councillor Wilkinson asked, but I think I need to expand on it a bit more. The first one is obviously some members of this committee are aware that there have been weekly calls of group leaders and the leadership team, as in Sean Scrutton and Angela Hutchins during the pandemic. So we've been discussing various things. One of those has been the Constitution, which I did request to come to the review committee. Obviously, members would have received an email about the Constitution and the rewrite, or not even the rewriting of it, a new Constitution being produced. And I assume many people have put in ideas towards that as well. However, this, I have been told and assured by Angela Hutchins and Sean Scrutton, will be coming to the idea is it's going to come to the review committee for the October meeting to be reviewed, with the possibility of it coming to the November meeting if there is any revisions or queries on it. So the October meeting will include the Constitution at least, and possibly the November one as well. That's the first point.
Okay, if I can just comment, you're completely correct, Councillor Hoy. In fact, I did miss that out. In addition to the RIPA, it is proposed that the Constitution will come back to the October meeting at the moment, so that will be penciled into that one. Apologies for that.
Okay, thank you. The second one, I'm just going to go back to the emergency planning and resilience planning. This has been raised for the last 3 years at review committee, and it came back in March. And I don't think I did request it's come back in the April meeting about particularly on the response to the virus, as it then was, as well as Councillor Cutmore. I think this has now moved on from there, because I think what's happened is, and I don't want to be critical, some things were done very well, and I'm sure other members would agree with this. Other things were missed, but that is always going to happen. The emergency planning before was about how good it was. I think we can now see how good or poor it was, and I'm aware that the council, and this was being requested by leaders of the council to do this is ask people what went well and what didn't go well, so that we know. But I still think this specifically does need a review, and I think it's probably moved on from emergency planning coming back with what they've done. I think this needs a more, how well did emergency planning work? How well did resilience planning work? Because resilience has been in front of this review committee a couple of years ago, and it was questioned then. And clearly there have been problems in both, but there have been some things which have worked in both. And I think it's quite important the review committee do look at this as quite an urgent item. And I'm aware that the council is working on this, because obviously we've all had the email, what did we think? And so there must be a report somewhere being produced by someone which this review committee can look at. And I think we should do that sooner rather than later, because as Councillor Wilkinson said, we don't want to be in the same position a year time and not have learned our lessons, see what we did well, see what we could improve on. And I think that's quite important we do that as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mr. Hoy. Councillor Mrs. Mason.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I couldn't see the screen for that. Yeah, some of the difficulties we have with Zoom, eh? I agree with Councillor Hoy and the other councillors that emergency planning is important, but I think we've got to be very careful here. There's the emergency planning as was, which is for general emergencies, if you like.
Yep.
Now, the minutes of the 7th of January, we asked for a report from the officer to come back for an update on concerns that were raised, I think, by all of us, particularly, I believe, Councillor Mrs. McPherson and myself, to the 2nd of April meeting. Now, I know that since then, things have changed and we weren't able to have that meeting. However, I would have expected the officer's report to have been ready prior to that, because it was only a week after lockdown, so you would have expected it to have been produced. So I'm concerned that wasn't done. But that report now is almost superseded by the issues that have raised from the pandemic and the response that the council has or has not had to that. So I would suggest we split the emergency planning into two. One, which is the existing emergency plan, which should easily be available, and put that onto the agenda. But we also need, as Councillor Hoy has said, to look at our response to the pandemic. And I know someone commented it could be in a year's time, it could be in August, it could be in October. It is quite important that it's done very easy. It became very apparent that Rochford District Council was reactive rather than proactive, in my opinion. And this needs to be looked at with a degree of urgency due to the prevailing times. There were many exceptional acts and many officers have done exceptionally well, worked very hard and gone over and above. Nevertheless, the structure needs to be there to support them. So I would suggest that we have those two different categories of emergency planning so that we can focus on the most important first. Before I go, I just will go on to the other thing. The other thing that I would like to be put on the working plan is I think we could ask for a report from the officers and the leadership team of the money that has been used by the government. We were given over £900,000, and the council has received that from central government, and it has published how it's been allocated. In fact, it's altered the allocation since then. But I think we need to know the reasons and the rationale for that method of allocation. And I think that's a very simple report that the review committee should request. And last but not least, Mr. Chairman, I hope I'm not inundating you here. Last but not least, just a query again on protocol. It is customary for the review committee to have an annual report, which is agreed by the review committee and presented to annual council. We have annual council in 2 days' time. We have a full council on the 14th. On neither agenda is there an annual report from the review committee, which isn't surprising because we haven't had one presented to us. So perhaps I could just ask for what's happened to that report and what actions you're taking about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that item I can come back and address. It was something that I raised with Paul Gowers several weeks ago when it first came to my attention. Obviously, it hadn't been done, but one was needed. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to come back, but it is something that I have spoken to him about. I will speak to Sonia about it. I haven't raised it with Sonia as yet, but I will aim to do that possibly for the next full council meeting after the 14th.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Chairman. But I think this is coming back to the point that was made earlier. We don't appear to have the staff to service the committee, and that is a concern. And perhaps that's something you can think on and take up in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Mason. Councillor Spearing.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Couple of comments that have come out of the last few questions raised by members. I believe Ms. Lucas could probably, if she'd been given notice, could have supplied the information of what that 900,000, where it has been spent and how it's been spent. I believe that was being put out on the website, but I'm not sure about that. But I'm pretty certain she has got that information available. With regard to the emergency planning, I would suggest that while the district council was reactive, I think the whole world has been pretty reactive. Nobody was fully geared up for it. And I would suggest that, as I understand it, officers, obviously with asking their questions, are already preparing a report. And I would suggest that either yourself or Sonia liaise with officers to produce the report and let us know when it will be available to us. As I say, I don't think that they want everybody to know the pluses and minuses, and I think perhaps it would be better for them to tell us when they have a comprehensive report available, rather than us trying to give them a deadline. They're working on it, as I understand already. So I think perhaps they could be more be advising us rather than us chasing them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spearing. Councillor Mrs. Mason, I can see you've indicated. Did you want to come back?
Yeah, Councillor Spearing apparently misunderstood what I said. I'm well aware that the council has produced a paper of how it has allocated the funds, and it's also produced a revised allocation. That's not what I asked. I asked for this overview and scrutiny committee to ask for, and it's a simple report, it should only take a very short time, to ask for the reasons and the rationale behind the method of allocation. That's all I'm asking for. A simple report that I'm sure that our Section 151 officer can produce quite easily for us, but I do think it's something we should look at. It's a substantial sum of money. The allocations have naturally changed over time, and they probably will again, but I think it's important that we do. That is our role. And I'm asking for us to undertake our role in a very small way there. I'm not questioning the amounts. I know the amounts, they've been published. I'm questioning the rationale and the reasons. I'm just asking.
How we got there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry to come back on that, but there was clearly a misunderstanding.
Okay. Not a problem, Councillor Mrs. Mason. Naomi, whilst you're still here at the moment, obviously you've heard what Councillor Mrs. Mason has requested. Do you think that would be a report that you could generate, a shortish report? I certainly don't get the impression from Councillor Mrs. Mason either that she's after an extensive a report from yourself with regards to how that's being done. And I think probably the details that she's actually asking for wouldn't constitute that anyway. Is that something you think you could possibly put together for review to have a look at?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd obviously want to liaise with Sonia and yourself to determine the most appropriate format and sort of timing of any such report. I'm happy to provide some more detail. I would suggest that it might be more appropriate to consider that towards the end of the year, when the actual financial implications of the crisis are a bit clearer. I think, as members have alluded to, the press release and detail that we've published already shows some indicative allocations, which are basically to recompense us for any additional expenditure incurred and loss of income that we're expecting throughout the financial year. But they are very much estimates at this stage, and obviously are subject to change as the year progresses. So I think any report that I was to produce, over the next couple of months, for example, would be a bit premature, because it is based on estimates, and certainly, obviously, we are open to scrutiny in terms of how we actually allocate the funding at the end of the year. But at the moment, it is very much as I say, very much based on estimates, and a great deal of uncertainty still, for example, about how some of our income projections will pan out over the rest of the financial year. So I would sort of politely suggest that it might be better to do something towards the end of the financial year rather than at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Councillor Mrs Mason, I hope that you're happy with that response from Naomi, and I'm certainly happy to discuss that with Sonia and Naomi after this meeting, with a view to the best time that we can get that in, and that will be on the work plan.
I'm not
the
happy
next meeting
to wait for the end of the year, Mr. Chairman. I'm unhappy. I'm unhappy that we can't have asked for a simple report for the reasons and rationale. However, if the officers and the administration don't want to share their reasons and rationale with this committee, we can hardly scrutinise it. So certainly I don't think a year is acceptable, but at the end of the year,
no,
it's up to you to instruct the officers to assist. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm not happy, but I will accept your decision.
Thank you, Mr Mason. I certainly didn't get the impression that the Naomi or the council are looking to avoid providing that information. I think it was just taking their advice as to when it would be most effective and most appropriate to deliver it to review. Councillor Milne.
Just a quick observation. As I understand it, in the league of how councils have performed in assisting businesses and individuals during this pandemic, Rochford Council comes rather near top of the list, and I think they did a remarkable job in adverse circumstances, and that's all I can say about it at the moment. We'll obviously get all the details later. And on that,
thank you. Thank you, Councillor Milne. And obviously, I would hope that would be reflected in any report that came forward. Councillor Mr Hoy.
Sorry, I'm clicking the wrong buttons there.
That's okay.
Mr Shaw's ahead of me, but I'm happy to speak first.
I do apologise. Sorry, that was a bit of a guess. I'm not going to lie.
Right, okay. It's just very quick. Could the Section 151 officer just confirm when she can produce the report? Because I would imagine if we produce the report, the rationale behind it must be there already. So I thought it's quite simple to do, and I can't see why we would have to wait that long for it. I mean, this is the report that Councillor Mrs Mason asked for.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Mr Hoy. Naomi, is that something you can address or answer at the moment?
I think the simple answer is that in terms of projecting forward what costs we think, well, we've obviously incurred some costs at this stage, but in terms of projecting forward what any costs might be throughout the rest of the financial year and the income losses, as I said, at this stage, they are based on estimates, and any grant funding hasn't been sort of allocated as such. It is purely to recompense us for any loss of income or extra expenditure that we're anticipating when we set the budget at the start of the financial year. So we do essentially need to see how they materialise throughout the financial year to then actually allocate the grants to those appropriate areas. So we're not prejudging the situation in terms of where that funding will go, but obviously where COVID has had an impact on our original budgetary estimates that were agreed by full council at the start of the year, we're looking to then attribute that funding to those pressure areas. And as I say, at the moment, because we're not clear exactly how those will materialise, I do think it's a little bit premature. We've obviously published as much information as we can at this stage about where we think those pressures will arise, but I think it would be limited value, and I'm not sure I can add a huge amount more than what has already been published, other than to say the grant will be allocated where those pressure areas arise. And obviously there's still some other government announcements and funding sort of in the offing as well in terms of support. So I think we'll have a rounder picture, a more comprehensive picture, as I say, certainly in a few months' time, and probably towards the end of the financial year would be of more value to members, in my opinion. But as I say, happy to have that conversation with yourself as chair and other members and officers to see if there's anything more I can add at this stage.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. I think we've probably talked about that enough for the time being. Councillor Mrs Mason, obviously it was a very good suggestion. I can assure you that I will discuss it with Naomi and Sonia. We will discuss it further, and it will come back on the work plan with every intention of getting it on the work plan before the end of this year. And if we can get it on there any earlier, then we will do. I'll give you my word. Councillor Mr Shaw, apologies for missing you then and putting Councillor Hoy ahead of you. That wasn't intentional. You're muted, Councillor Shaw.
I was only going to say I agree with what you were saying earlier. I can't see the point in trying to produce a report that's not going to be completed, and in some places it's going to be a guesstimate, and then the officer will then be criticised for not giving the full report. She said it still will be produced at the end of the year. We should accept that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mr Shaw. Councillor Mrs Mason, I can see you've indicated to speak. If it's on this topic, if we could make it fairly quick.
No, Mr Chairman, thank you. It's not on this topic. I think we've exhausted it, and I accept your word that you're going to investigate it. No, I actually wanted to come back on something that Councillor Mills said, and many of the councils, he's right, that the effort that Rochford District Council has made to give funds to businesses has been exemplary, and we have had 3 weekly, then 2 weekly conference calls amongst the group leaders, and we've seen the amount of work that's gone into that, and I think the council has performed exceptionally well. What members probably don't know is that group leaders were given information, and we've actually gone round to these businesses in our own time to contact the ones where our officers couldn't contact them, and to advise them that they are able to apply. There's been a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes, and also other members of my group have certainly done that as well. And I think everyone has done what they can to assist. And I think that's something that we are not trying to criticise here. What we're trying to do is to obtain information to see if there's any improvements. That I think we should acknowledge, and thank you, Councillor Milne, for bringing that up, because we don't often have an ability to do that in meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs Mason. So obviously I hope members can see that the work plan will change slightly when you next see it. We have got the Constitution in October, the peer review to add on. We will now look at Councillor Mrs Mason's suggestion regarding the grant allocation and the method of allocation. We will also go out to the public for a consultation, and we've kept January free at the moment for any response that we get from the public with topics. There are additional work items that members can see that are listed there, and obviously we do need to look at the situation regarding emergency planning / COVID-19. All I would just ask is for members just to bear with us at the current time. These items will be added to the work plan. I will liaise with, unfortunately, it's Sonia that I'm going to have to speak to mainly, but these items will be added, members. And I hope that's acceptable at the moment. I know that for some it's possibly a little bit broad, but I do assure you that they will be on there. No other members have indicated to speak, which does bring the meeting to an end. But before I do close the meeting, I know that we don't have any other business section, but I would just like to take this opportunity. I'm not sure if all members are aware or not that Michelle is leaving us, unfortunately, at the end of the month. So just on behalf of the review committee, Michelle, we would like to thank you I would like to thank you personally for the assistance that you've given me, and hopefully I'm sure that those sentiments are echoed by all members of the review committee that thank you for your help.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
You'll be missed.
Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, that's lovely. Thanks for saying that.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
And I thank you.
Thank you. We'll really miss you.
Oh, lovely. Thank you.
Some of us will
Sorry,
see.
Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
You've been a diamond.
Lovely. Thank you, members, for your time this evening. I do appreciate it. Thank you to officers for attending, to portfolio holders, and Sonia again for the immense amount of work you're doing to help not only me but other members. I know that you're extremely busy at the moment, so your help is much appreciated. And so thank you all for coming this evening. And the meeting's closed.
Thank
you, Jamie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Stay safe.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Bye.
Thank you.